So welcome everyone to our webinar this afternoon, Help Us Rise, Solutions to End Economic Abuse. We are hosting this webinar this afternoon in collaboration with the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment and the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. So we are so pleased to bring you this session as a collaborative. Hopefully we'll provide you lots of new information and resources that you'll be able to take away and apply within your workplace setting or in your own lives as well. Before we begin, I want to provide our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we gather on the traditional territory of a number of First Nations and acknowledge their stewardship of this land and its waters as protectors of its natural abundance throughout the ages. We seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land that remains their homes to this day. May this relationship be one of peace and friendship, based in honor and deep respect. Just a few logistics before we begin our session. Everyone's cameras and microphones will be muted. We do encourage you to make comments in the chat box, and we will be posting links to resources that will be shared by our speakers today in the chat box, and those will also be posted on our websites after the session as well, so you will have access to those. We will encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A box, and we will have time at the end of the presentation to address those. We may remind you to put your questions in the Q&A if you accidentally put them in the chat box. Sometimes we find the chat box gets busy, so we want to make sure that we don't miss your questions because they're so important. The other reminder is that we do again have the ASL interpreters with us, so we're privileged to have them for our webinar. As I mentioned, you can enable closed captioning at the bottom of your screen with the CC button that you can turn on or off. And you can adjust the layout of the speakers with the grid box that's at the top of your screen where the speakers are to your preference. We are recording today's webinar, and it will be shared on both the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse website and our website after the session, probably in a couple days, and again, as well as the links and resources that are shared. And at the end of the session, we do appreciate your feedback. So if you have time and you would like to give us your feedback on what you've learned and how you may apply that information and suggestions for future topics, that would be greatly appreciated. There'll be a little pop-up link at the end of the presentation today, as well as a link and a follow-up email that we provide with the link to the recording. Just a reminder that this is a public forum, so we do respect people's privacy and confidentiality. If you have a certain personal circumstance that you would like further information or support with, please reach out to our organizations. We'd be more than pleased to provide some support. You can call our office at the number on the screen, or you can contact us through our website, and you can indicate what you're looking for, and we will connect with you after. Our contact information will be available for all organizations at the end of the session as well today. Just a little bit about our organization if you haven't participated in our previous webinars. Our vision really is to make sure that seniors are free from ageism and abuse, where human rights are advanced, protected, and respected. We are funded under the Ontario government, under the Ministry for Seniors and Accessibility, where we implement Ontario's strategy to combat elder abuse. One of the pillars of that strategy is to do education and awareness, and that is why we do many of these webinars for our outreach, including today's. We have a number of other sessions coming up between now and the end of the year. So we do have another webinar coming up on Friday, also addressing the economic prosperity and security of older women, and in partnership with HelpAge, and also on November the 26th, again with our Canadian Network on gender-based violence. So you can check our website. We have many other conversations and webinars happening as well. So I would like to turn it over to my colleague as well, and just to introduce her organization about the Canadian network. So thank you.
Thank you, Rayanne. Hello, everyone. It's very nice to see you all today. Thanks for making the time. If you are new to our webinars, I'd like to introduce myself. I am Benedict Schöpflin, the Executive Director of CNPEA, which is the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. And CNPEA is a pan-Canadian organization, and our work is really to improve awareness, support, and capacity to have a national coordinated approach to the questions of elder abuse and neglect. And so, a lot of our work is focused on knowledge mobilization and education, as well as policy reform. And we do this through a lot of collaborations with fantastic organizations. Many of them are in what we would call the aging sphere, and others are also just focused on issues that are quite relevant to older people as well. So this is why we are so pleased to have today the Canadian Centre for Women Empowerment, CCFWE. We've invited them to speak today because from November 1st to November 26th, they ran a campaign called Help Us Rise. It's a national initiative that's focused on raising awareness about economic abuse and advocating for the empowerment of survivors. It's held in November to align with Financial Literacy Month and Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So today they're going to be telling us about not only their campaign, but the importance of focusing on structural barriers that survivors of economic abuse face. Because, particularly when it comes to securing and maintaining housing, as it is a very important piece of the puzzle when someone is trying to leave a domestic violence. So today we're going to hear from Lauren and Nicola. If I may just see, perfect. So Lauren is a registered social worker at the Canadian Centre and works at the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment. They hold an MA in Social Justice and Community Engagement and a Master of Social Work, and have experience both in frontline services and advocacy through working through the shelter, the child welfare systems, anti-violence initiatives with various organizations, all the way to today with CCFWE. So welcome, Lauren. And we'll also hear from Nicola, who is the project manager for financial empowerment at CCFWE and human resources project manager, as well as DEI specialist, a full plate. Nicola is focused on the financial empowerment project, where she leads initiatives that support the financial well-being and economic resilience of survivors. Nicola has worked in human resources as well. So this background in HR strategy and workplace development are really aligned with empowering women and communities. So Nicola, has more than 10 years of experience supporting and mentoring women who've experienced domestic abuse and systemic barriers, and is aligned and committed to fostering equity, belonging, dignity, and long-term impact through survivor-centered programs. All things which we are very, very enthused by and supportive of. So I'll say no more. I guess I'll leave the floor open for Lauren and Nicola to tell us more about their work, and we'll see you on the other side for the Q&A.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. So as was introduced, sorry, my name is Nicola. And so before we kind of begin our time together, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory that CCFWE operates on. We recognize that the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, CCFWE, is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples inhabited and cared for this land and continue to do so today. As a grassroots organization, we commit to dismantling barriers to economic resources, especially for Indigenous communities facing abuse. Acknowledging colonialism's ongoing impact, we pledge to work alongside Indigenous peoples, following their lead to restore justice and build a better future. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, and by doing so, give our respect to its inhabitants. So please be advised that this webinar will include discussions about trauma and abuse. We aim to create a supportive and respectful environment for all participants. If at any point you feel uncomfortable, please feel free to take a break or just step away as is needed. Thank you. So one of my colleagues will post a link in the chat. Okay. So today we are here to speak about economic abuse within intimate partner relationships. At Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, or CCFWE as we are lovely called, we're focused on addressing all forms of economic abuse. That includes economic control, economic exploitation, and education and employment sabotage. We work nationally to drive policy change, provide survivor-led support, and push for systemic transformation, especially for women in marginalized communities. Our mission is to build a survivor-informed, culturally appropriate, and rights-based support system, one that leads to safety, dignity, and financial independence. So now that you've had a sense of who we are and the mission that drives our work at CCFWE, let's take a closer look at how we put that mission into action. So some of the things that we do, research and evidence. We conduct community-based research in collaboration with BIPOC survivors, nonprofits, and financial institutions, just to bridge those gaps in knowledge and practice. We also do training and education, where we deliver trauma-informed, culturally sensitive programs that increase awareness and build capacity among financial institutions, nonprofit organizations, survivors, and service providers. We do system change as well, where we engage with all levels of government, financial consumer agencies of Canada, bank lenders, credit collectors, and fintech companies, and international bodies, just to introduce economic abuse into national policy frameworks and fight structural inequality. We also do programs and peer support, from financial literacy to credit repair and course debt support. We offer a wide range of survivor-led programs to help individuals rebuild their lives. Technology and innovation. I think we're having issues with our, but I'll continue. Technology and innovation. We've developed Canada's first mobile app focused on economic harm. We also work with banks to ensure technology safety on e-transfer and payments. Thank you so much. And we'll be moving on to understanding economic abuse. So now we're going to take a deeper dive into the topic of economic abuse. Economic abuse is a form of family and gender-based violence. This type of abuse can be hard to see because it doesn't leave visible bruises. Instead, it shows up as an empty bank account, damaged credit, and stolen futures. It happens when an abuser controls a survivor's ability to earn, use, or keep money. And that control can trap survivors in cycles of poverty and violence. Okay. 95% of survivors of intimate partner violence experience economic abuse. In our 2021 Ottawa research, 93% of survivors said that they were denied access to their own income, whether that's from wages or government supports. 94% have had their rent or bill money spent by their perpetrator without their permission, and 84% had debt accumulated in their name, while over 90% had no control over major financial decisions in their household. Now, these aren't just numbers. They represent real people who are often silenced, trapped, and left without any sort of options. Economic abuse can take many forms, but today we're going to focus on three main types. The first one is economic control. Now, this occurs when an abuser limits or completely controls a survivor's access to financial resources and decision making. For example, they do it by monitoring or restricting all the survivor's financial activity, denying access to bank accounts, credit cards, or even cash. They force survivors to ask for money or live on a strict allowance. The second one is economic exploitation. Here, the abuser doesn't just control money. They actually damage the survivor's financial standing. And this can look like maybe stealing money, assets, or property, coercing or, encouraging the survivor to sign financial documents or just take on debt. using the survivor's identity to commit financial fraud or open credit. And finally, employment and education sabotage. Now, this type of abuse targets a survivor's ability to build independence. It happens when an abuser controls or limits their access to work or education. The impact can be even more severe when the survivor works alongside their partner. Abusers may prevent them from working or attending interviews, harass them on the job, interfere with childcare or transportation to sort of interrupt or block work or school attendance. Sorry, excuse me. So now that we've explored the broader concept of economic abuse, let's take a closer look at how economic abuse shows up in the lives of senior survivors. Economic abuse is one of the most common forms of abuse experienced by senior survivors. Many have been financially dependent on their abuser throughout their lives and may have been prevented from seeking work or developing independent sources of income. Further gaps in education and careers can limit their options to leave these relationships, which makes it even harder to rebuild financial independence, thus increasing their economic vulnerability. Age is also a contributing factor. Ageist beliefs that senior women are not in need of money or are even capable of managing their own finances. This can reinforce economic control and exploitation within relationships. Senior women are also more likely to experience social and physical isolation from their family, friends, and community supports. This lack of connection can increase senior survivors' vulnerability and make it even harder for survivors to recognize the abuse their experiences. And survivors also may be reliant on their abusive partners for care and other specific needs, or vice versa. This can add a complex layer to the relationship, as caregiving relationships can deepen dependency and limit a survivor's ability to seek help or even leave. For seniors in equity deserving groups, such as Black women, newcomer women, First Nation, Métis or Inuit women, women with disabilities, and gender diverse individuals, these experiences can be even more complex. The intersection of ageism, racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination can increase a senior survivor's vulnerability to economic abuse, and it limits their access to safety and support, further isolating. Language barriers and limited knowledge of Canadian systems can further prevent senior survivors from rebuilding financial independence. So now that we've spoken about that, we're also going to look at the impacts of economic abuse. One of the impacts is financial. Survivors are often left with coarse debt, damaged credit, and even bankruptcy. This makes it harder for survivors to even regain their independence, as they struggle to secure housing, employment, or rebuild financial stability. For senior survivors, economic abuse can impact savings and pensions, while ageism may create additional barriers when seeking employment. Physical impacts. Survivors who experience economic abuse may experience high levels of anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, suicidal thoughts, and social isolation. Survivors can also face heightened health conditions, including cardiovascular and gastrointestinal. I always mess up this word, forgive me. Gastrointestinal diseases, issues during pregnancy, and chronic stress. Further, limited access to money can mean skipping meals or essential medical care. This can include not being able to access required medication or procedures, which can have long-term and detrimental effects. There's that emotional and psychological aspect as well. Survivors report high levels of anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and suicidal thoughts while experiencing economic abuse. Many survivors experience social isolation and are unable to afford to connect with support networks or communities. Shame and stigma can also impact a survivor's ability to move forward. The long-term impacts are even more strenuous because economic abuse can trap survivors in ongoing cycles of financial insecurity. These impacts can last for years. Survivors often struggle to rebuild independence and stability, especially when the abuse continues through coerced debt or legal battles and other systemic barriers. So, for survivors in equity deserving groups such as First Nation, Inuit and Métis women, Black and racialized women, senior women, newcomer women with disabilities, and gender diverse women, the long term impacts can be heightened as they are more likely to experience poverty, unemployment, and face a higher risk of housing insecurity. These factors can push survivors deeper into poverty. So now that I've gone deeper into that topic, I'd like to pass it over to my colleague, Lauren, to continue this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nicola. So, as Benedict mentioned, we're doing a campaign this month, and our focus is around housing and the intersections with economic abuse. So, I'm going to speak a little bit to that piece. So, according to one of our national studies with service providers, 79% said that clients stay in abusive relationships due to lack of housing accessibility. So, economic abuse can trap survivors in abusive relationships because of the limited, safe, and affordable housing options. If survivors can leave, they often face a highly competitive and expensive housing market or long wait lists at emergency shelters. Additionally, women are disproportionately in low wage and precarious work, which can further impact their ability to leave and afford housing. So, for senior survivors, economic abuse can undermine their economic stability, especially related to their ability to secure and maintain housing. So, in today's competitive housing market, senior survivors may face additional barriers. That can include discrimination and ageism from landlords, past credit or rental history problems, and high rental costs. Accessibility is also a big issue. So, for example, emergency shelters and transitional housing programs may not fit the needs of senior survivors, such as health and caregiving needs. They're often not equipped to accommodate the needs related to age, disability, or long-term care. Limited accessibility, a lack of age-appropriate facilities, and a lack of staff training can make these environments difficult for senior survivors. As a result, senior survivors may be forced to remain in abusive relationships due to lack of suitable options. So now I'm going to move on to just discussing the structural barriers. So according to another national survey done by us, 74% of service providers reported there is a lack of available support systems for survivors of economic abuse. So one of the main challenges we've seen is there's no consistent definition or recognition of economic abuse in Canadian legislation. So this lack of response or understanding within systems, especially within the legal system, further restricts survivors in accessing support and keeps them dependent on abusers. The financial sector also lacks adequate responses to economic abuse. Our research shows that 70% of survivors felt that their bank did not recognize or respond appropriately when signs of economic abuse were present. There's a significant gap in financial institution responses. Further, in our 2021 survey, 67% of bank staff said they would not know how to identify signs of economic abuse in intimate partner relationships if they were presented by a client. For senior survivors, these barriers can make it even more difficult to access support. Many have experienced a lifetime of economic control or exploitation and financial dependence on an abusive partner. This leaves them with limited financial literacy or understanding of what supports are out there. For those who hold intersecting identities, such as a newcomer woman or Black women or Indigenous women, these barriers are heightened by systemic ageism, racism, and sexism. So now I'm going to discuss the cultural and social norms that relate to economic abuse. So cultural and social norms can significantly shape how senior survivors experience and access support. So in some cultures and communities, economic control by men or a partner is normalized and not seen as abusive. This can make it really difficult for survivors to recognize certain behaviors as economic abuse. For senior survivors, particularly those who have lived with traditional gendered roles, economic dependence and decision-making by their partners or relatives may feel expected or normal, rather than controlling. These expectations can also be reinforced by caregiving responsibilities. For example, many women are expected to provide unpaid care for children, spouses, and grandchildren well into old age. The impact of these roles can deepen that financial insecurity and limit options for senior survivors to leave. So cultural understandings of relationships, marriages, and money can also shape how economic abuse is talked about. Senior survivors may face fear of stigma, shame, or loss of relationship and community in disclosing abuse. These intersecting factors can create significant barriers for senior survivors to reach out for support and recognize what they're experiencing. So now that we've explored how economic abuse shows up for senior survivors, we're going to talk a little bit about the supports available at CCFWE. So before I go into the specific strategies and tools that we offer, I'm just going to discuss the approach we take through our programming and supports. So a survivor-centered approach for us means prioritizing a survivor's goals, autonomy, and lived experience. So a survivor might not be ready to discuss what they're experiencing or discuss their options. That's where we want to focus on education and safety. A trauma-informed approach for us means taking small steps. So trauma can make that long-term financial planning feel very overwhelming. So it's important to support survivors in regaining that financial autonomy slowly and at their own pace. So instead of assuming that financial independence or separation from a partner is the immediate goal, recognize that survivors might need to take those gradual steps towards regaining financial independence, especially for senior survivors who may have been their whole life. So now I'm just going to discuss some specific tools we have at CCFWE. So one of our tools is the Economic Abuse Screening Tool, which is a toolkit for service providers. So this provides service providers with tools to identify and understand survivors' experiences of economic abuse and connect them with the essential resources. So the toolkit has 4 parts. It includes screening questions to help identify the different forms of economic abuse, has some background information to help service providers understand economic abuse, and then also a survivor handout. So that includes simple trauma-informed explanations for survivors and community outreach. And then the 4th part is a list of Canadian resources and guidance for supporting survivors. Another tool that we suggest is financial safety planning. So this is the process of supporting survivors to assess and understand their financial resources, to protect themselves from the risks of economic abuse, and to help them rebuild after economic abuse. So it also includes some general strategies for survivors to stay safe. But safety planning needs to be personalized for each survivor. So these strategies are based on our research with survivors across Canada, but might not necessarily apply to every survivor. So I just want to reiterate that using a survivor-centered and trauma-informed approach in safety planning is making sure the survivor leads that conversation and it meets the needs of the survivor. So as service providers, our role is to offer those tools and education, but not define safety on behalf of survivors. So some strategies that we suggest around financial safety planning is opening a new bank account or updating banking information. So we encourage survivors to open an account in their name only if possible. If that's not possible, encourage survivors to start saving money where they can. So whether that is with a trusted friend or a trusted service provider, but starting to build up their own income in a way that feels safe for them. Another strategy we suggest is changing passwords and PINs for utilities and any online banking accounts. So this can ensure if an abuser doesn't have continued access to any online accounts. Also reminds survivors to update account recovery emails or contact information. We also suggest to keep and make copies of personal and financial records. So one suggestion is related to that is developing a private financial inventory. So that's figuring out all your different finances. So whether that's what your income is, what your assets are, debts, loans, and then identifying what's yours and what's joint with your partner. This can just give survivors an idea of what their current financial status is and kind of what they need to prioritize when they are rebuilding. We also suggest keeping any documentation in a trusted, secure location, such as with a trusted family or friend, or a safety deposit box that only they have access to. We also encourage survivors to regularly obtain a credit report and to help them monitor their financial activity. So this could flame any unauthorized access to their financial accounts and also give them that idea of what their financial situation is at that point. We always also encourage to protect that technology and digital privacy. So making sure they turn off their location services on their phone, remove any shared devices or accounts, log out of shared social media or financial apps. If survivor does suspect that their abuser is monitoring their devices, majority of victim services will help survivors access new phones. And then another strategy we suggest is seek legal advice and document evidence. So legal advice can help survivors understand what their rights are, especially if they're going through a legal separation. They can give advice on how to separate finances and steps to challenge coerced debt. If we do strongly encourage survivors to seek that legal advice before agreeing to anything in relation to legal separation. And then lastly, if a survivor is still living with an abusive partner, we suggest preparing an emergency exit bag in case of escalation. So we suggest creating a bag where they have some of those important documents and other items they may need, such as like their IDs, keys, any medication that they would require, copies of any custody orders or important documents. And we suggest that the survivor keeps that in a safe location, so whether that is with a friend or family member or even with a service provider. So at CCFWE, we also offer financial empowerment and literacy programs to survivors of economic abuse living in Ontario. So Reclaim and Rise is our 6-week virtual program for refugee survivors. Participants learn about budgeting, debt management, and financial safety planning. And then Shield to Thrive is also a 6-week virtual program prioritizing Black, Indigenous, and racialized survivors. So this program is currently on pause as we're going through a rebranding process and will relaunch in the new year. And part of both of our programs, survivors have access to a social worker and a financial advisor throughout and after the program. Another tool we offer is the STEER app, which stands for a support tool for economic abuse recovery. And it's a trauma-informed web and mobile app that prioritizes security and privacy for survivors of gender-based violence. So some of the features include it has multilingual content, so it's available in 5 different languages. It has security measures embedded, such as a PIN and a quick exit function. It also has educational content to help survivors with safety planning and understanding economic abuse. And then it has resource connections, so it links users with region-specific services for economic abuse. And that is available both on Apple and the Google Play Store. And then we also have developed fact sheets on economic abuse to help survivors, service providers, and bank workers to recognize and understand economic abuse. So our fact sheets are available in a variety of languages and available on our website, which my colleague is going to be sharing the link in our chat. And all these links are also embedded in this presentation. And then lastly, before I finish up, I wanted to highlight our Help Us Rise campaign. So throughout the month of November, and was ending on November 26th, which is National Economic Abuse Awareness Day, we're spotlighting economic abuse. So today's webinar is part of that series. Keep an eye on our social media, and I'll also chat a little bit more about how you can get involved. We also have some upcoming events and resources specific to the Help Us Rise campaign. So on November 18th, it's the Global Summit on Economic Abuse. So there'll be leaders from across the world gathering to talk about economic abuse. And our founder and CEO, Messi, will be one of the speakers at this event. We're also hosting a panel discussion on November 20th, specifically around making housing safer for survivors. And that link for registration will be shared. And then we also have developed a fact sheet on economic abuse in housing, as well as we recently published our femicide brief, which includes calls for actions for all government levels. And we're also asking folks to sign on. So we'll discuss that a little more and we'll share the links in the chat as well. And just before I finish off, I just wanted to briefly mention the Code of Conduct. So since the Code of Conduct for delivery of banking services to seniors was released in 2019, financial institutions have to implement and report on processes to support survivors facing financial abuse. We're excited to announce that the government recently announced to develop a similar code of conduct on the prevention of economic abuse that we've long advocated for. So it is voluntary, but it sets clear expectations on how financial institutions can identify, prevent, and respond to economic abuse experienced by anyone. And we'll be hosting a webinar in the new year with Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario in the Canadian network to talk a bit more about that code of conduct and how that relates to the senior code of conduct. We can move to the next slide.
Oh no,
What
are
will
we
you do?
stuck?
Oh,
Yes,
I think we're a little
we are stuck.
frozen. That's okay. The last slide is just some extra resources that we suggest. And then we can send those out as well to participants just individually. But they're just some external organizations that are supporting survivors and just some external organizations that provide financial literacy support.
Thank you so much, Lauren and Nicola. Before we move on and to the Q&A, well, I guess it's already kind of entering Q&A territory, but there are a couple people who are interested in the Global Summit on Economic Abuse that you just mentioned. Is this
Yeah.
something that is going to be accessible, say, by Zoom, by anyone to listen in, or yeah?
Yep. Yeah, so it'll be available on Zoom, which I think it is on our website under the Help Us Rise 2025 events that Michaela just shared that link in the chat there. So if you go on there, you'll see it and you can press on it and we'll bring you to that registration form. It is free to access. Oh, and Michaela just sent the direct link. And it is on Zoom, so it's accessible in that sense.
Wonderful. And just as a reminder, the resources, which we couldn't display on the screen as you were speaking about them, will be listed obviously on your website, but also on our website, cnpa.ca, and Elder Abuse Prevention's
Yes,
website. So one way or another, everybody will get access to them so that you can
exactly.
explore at your leisure. So I guess we have we've got 20 minutes, which is great. So plenty of time to take questions from the audience. So I'm going to invite everyone now to, if you have questions for our presenters, to click on the little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and type your question there so we can track them more easily. We'll give you a few minutes. In the meantime, I was wondering, Lauren, if you could tell us a little bit more about the Help Us Rise campaign and how people can participate, what they can do.
Yeah, definitely. So, as I said, Help Us Rise is to focus on economic abuse and bring that to the spotlight. So, one way to get involved is sharing on our social media. So, you can follow us at CCFWE on Instagram or the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment on Facebook and LinkedIn. We're sharing a wide range of posts daily. So, please reshare. We also have a social media toolkit on our website if you wanted to share on your own platform, and it includes sample posts that you can reshare. Um, yeah, so social media is a big component of this campaign, so we would love that reshare and collaboration at any sense. And then also attend our events if you can. Like for folks, thank you for coming today. As I stated, those few other events that are upcoming, please attend, follow us as well on social media so you can keep updated on what we're doing, and reach out for collaboration. Make sure we share our emails at the end of this presentation. So if you have any questions or concerns or interested in collaborating, we're always open to collaborate.
That's wonderful. And this is exactly why we're doing this today. It's always a pleasure to work with you. Um, I really appreciate that you put a focus on older survivors as well, because I find that for a population that is already often made invisible, being older and in a situation of abuse, in an intimate situation or family or caregiving situation, it's even harder to be seen, to be heard, and to access resources if and when they exist. So it is truly appreciated. Um, are you okay? Because we received quite a few early questions from before the webinar even opened from participants. Are you okay if we maybe tackle a couple of these? Yep. Okay.
Yes, definitely.
So there was one that I thought was really interesting because, as you said, you mentioned in your presentation, people are maybe not ready to disclose right away, to talk about it or do something immediately. But there was a question asking, how do you approach people who do not see themselves as victims of financial or economic abuse? Because that's a perspective shift sometimes for people.
Definitely. And that's like the one of the hardest parts with economic abuse is like it's not easy to recognize, right? And it's hard to identify, yeah, this is what I'm experiencing. And even with the term like survivor, we recognize that not a lot of people like to identify with that because it doesn't maybe necessarily fit their situation. So one suggestion that like I um suggest for like approaching survivors is like meeting them where they're at. So if they're not ready to kind of identify or hear that like, hey, this is abuse, take that like financial literacy approach and like using that from like a personal standpoint to be like, hey, I recently attended this financial literacy course and it was really helpful. And so try to focus around education rather than saying, hey, this is what you're experiencing, you need to get help, right? Because
Mhm.
t anytime you tell someone what to do, they're going to get defensive, no matter what it is, and especially when it comes to abuse. So, making sure you're focusing on that education rather than you need to do A, B, and C, right? Where that education piece, when they're ready to get support, that can help them being like, okay, well, this is where I can go now that I'm ready. Nicola, did you have anything to add?
No, I was just gonna say, in my experience, because I'm an extrovert, so sometimes when I walk around with my card, and then I see people at random events, and I give them my card, and they're like, "What is this? Like, what are you doing?" And I explain what I do, and they're like, "Economic abuse, what's that?" And then it's an opportunity to tell them more about the program and just even share my story about when I think about I've usually thought about gross domestic product and inflation and not understand the ramifications and the financial aspect of it, right? Because we're just focused on that piece and we can never put it together with everything else that's happening. And I tell them the story of when I first started with CCFWE back in 2021, how, hey, I didn't even know what it was, right? And then when I started hearing more about it, then I started recognizing, hey, I also went through economic abuse because that component of hiding your money, leaving it with friends, you don't associate it as because you're coming from a place of, hey, my partner cares about me. He loves me. He's protecting me. He's making sure I'm financially secure. I don't have to go to work. He's providing all my needs, but you don't actually see it as control. And so when I started hiding money, I still didn't see it as, oh, I have to do this for my safety. It was just, oh, I just don't want him to know how much money I have because he's just so nosy. He's in everything, right? So when I started with CCFWE, it was interesting because again, the education piece is really important because you get defensive because you're emotionally tied to that person.
Mhm.
And society has taught us whenever there's a problem, the onus is on us to leave the situation. So we also have to remember we're telling somebody to leave a situation where all they're leaving with is their immediate needs. That emotional connection is so hard to break because it's been so many years. And you make excuses and you say, no, that's not me. So it's just leading with grace and empathy and understanding that it's not black and white. There's so many things that are attached to that. Your emotion, there's a long relationship. There's so much history there. And sometimes it's just being able just to listen and just be there when you're needed the most. Yeah.
Mhm. I think particularly for older people where the abuse might be coming from children or other family members, the family bonds and all the complexity of that can really make it difficult to recognize, acknowledge that something is going on first, and then also it can affect the decision-making process because they might be doing something wrong. They might be taking your money or preventing your employment opportunities or whatever it may be. But it's also somebody you care about that you don't want to create additional trouble for. So I fully understand that.
Yeah, exactly. Because in one of my conversations with an elderly person who's very near and dear to me, she said that when I think about all the things that he's done to me in the past, I don't want to associate with him. We sleep in separate rooms, but where am I going to go? I'm older now. What am I going to do? I can't work now. So I just stay in my room with my dog, and he stays in his room, and even just interacting with him because she has all that pent-up frustration. And it's so I just talk to her and I listen, and you know, I'm just there for her. We go for walks together and we just talk about it because that's as much as she needs at this point in time because there's those guilty feelings of I should have left a long time ago,
Mhm.
right? So it's hard.
It
I think
is.
the other
It's.
factor is, which I think you've alluded to in the presentation also in terms of barriers, is the different cultural diversities of maybe an older adult sponsored to be here that, is reliant on the family or the person that's providing the care or a roof over their head. So they feel there's no other option to go. Language could be a barrier. There's so many complexities, that intersectionality that you had mentioned, Nicola, at the beginning, that also prevents people. But I think, the advice you were saying about being by their side and just talking to them and not solving the problem, but giving them support, and that maybe at some point they will be willing to acknowledge and maybe address the situation at their own time.
Now, we have a question from the audience that just came in that is asking whether CCFWE or maybe partners of CCFWE provide education to hospitals, particularly social workers, about these programs. The person is asking whether you provide consultations to facilitate safe discharges from hospitals as well. Is that something that is available or on your radar at all?
So not like we haven't collaborated specifically with hospitals, but are definitely open. We have worked with social workers and different social services. Like recently we partnered with OCASI, which is the Ontario Council on Agencies Serving Immigrants, and provided a webinar on understanding and recognizing economic abuse to their network. So we're always open for collaboration. Feel free to email me if to whoever asked this question, and that's something we can definitely explore. We work from a really collaborative approach, making sure we're meeting the needs of the organization that's reaching out, as well as staying aligned with our values.
And just in
Wonderful.
addition, Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario also provides training to hospital sector social workers. We have actually presented to the Ontario Social Workers Association on different factors, including safety planning as well. So you can reach out to our organization in addition, depending on where you're located. We can try to accommodate that as well.
And I think that answers a question that came in earlier, that was inquiring about elder abuse information for the community, whether there was a charge and who to contact. So if you're in Ontario, by all means, do contact Rayanne. We'll put the contact information in the chat box as well again. I wanted to go back to towards the end of the presentation, you mentioned the forthcoming strategy on financial abuse, the forthcoming code of conduct for banking institutions. And somebody had sent an early question to us about the role of financial institutions. And they were asking, what role can financial institution play to support those who are at risk or suffering of economic abuse by a partner?
Yeah, I might pull in my colleague Michaela as well to help me answer this. But once we like see that code of conduct released, um it is voluntary, but taking
Mhm.
that on and implementing it within their financial institution is a big part. And working with organizations such as ours and you folks on like how to implement specific supports for folks, especially survivor-centered approaches within banking institutions. That's a big one for us. We're working with a few banks right now to help get supports for survivors across Canada. Michaela, did you have anything to add around that? Or
Ray,
Nicola?
Rayanne, can we, Nicola, sorry, before you answer, is there a chance that we can unmute Michaela or is this automated?
I think I'm unmuted.
Oh,
Um,
beautiful.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Benedict. Yeah, I think Lauren already mentioned that about the code of conduct. I think in general, I think it was also part of the presentation where we saw that there's actually a lot of still gaps and challenges when it comes to the financial institutions and how to deal with economic abuse. So we just don't see like a cohesive like code of practice basically, which hopefully the code of conduct that is going to be developed will tackle. In general, I'm not sure now if Lauren mentioned that, but we see that when we heard from a lot of survivors that we were consulting, that actually sometimes the banking staff can be the first line of mentioning economic abuse experiences or like experiences they have with economic abuse because there's still so much shame and stigma surrounding finances and money that they don't want to go to friends or family to talk about it, but they go to banks. So in that sense, financial institutions actually have a very important role to play or have an opportunity to prevent early and mitigate the consequences of financial abuse. So in that sense, we are also really working together with financial institutions, also through our task force that is like a group of representatives from various financial institutions to kind of tackle those challenges and also make financial institutions aware of them. I can put in the chat as well some document from our Financial Future Summit that we held in November of 2023 where representatives from all across from the UK, Australia, and Canada came together from the financial system to talk how to make basically banking safer for survivors and also more accessible. And there's a link to our report, which also shows like 12 tangible actions that financial institutions can take to prevent and reduce economic abuse.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Don't mean to cut you off if you have more to say. Nope. Okay. And Nicola, I'm sorry. I totally jumped over you.
No, no,
Did
no,
you
no,
have...
no. That's perfectly fine. Michaela answered the question. Perfectly
Okay.
fine.
I've seen a few comments come through, questions/comments that have to do with the fact that in some cases for older people, there's also matters of health. So you might be critically ill, you might start developing cognitive challenges and experiencing economic abuse as well, not necessarily have the capacity to react or do something about it. And the person, or actually several persons, asked, how does one take action in these situations? And Rayanne, please jump in if you want to add something as well.
Yeah, Ryan, did you want to start and I can add on or?
No,
Do
go
you have a
ahead.
preference?
I was typing
Okay.
something, so you go first and then I'll add on. Sorry.
For sure. I think one of the important, like one of the most important aspects is that holistic approach and like wraparound support. Like financial literacy and empowerment is one piece of it, right? It's not the whole picture, and making sure that, especially senior survivors have access to wraparound support. So having access to a social worker and care workers that are checking in on them and making sure they have those supports is a really big piece of it, right? Because if they're isolated from those supports, then that's going to be the difficulty of getting them supports for specifically economic abuse, where when we have those wraparound, those things aren't slipping through the cracks and getting ignored. Rhiannon, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's just more, it's that continuing the conversation. I think sometimes people,
Yeah.
they, if the person doesn't act the way that they think they should, or they should leave the situation, like you were saying before, Lauren, about don't telling people what to do. It's being on the journey, their journey. This is their decisions and choices. We don't want to fall into that coercive control, kind of like Nicola had said, because it is their journey and it's their choice. And whether we agree with it or not, but being there along the way and maybe providing the supports and knowing where to take them to appointments, taking them to offering them where the counseling can be, maybe going with them or helping them make the phone calls. Because at some point, maybe they will choose to take more action than's happening right now. And it could be slower. Someone may leave. I had a phone call this morning, and it was an intimate partner violence. It was a male that was being victimized, and same thing about wasn't ready. But being there, giving them a support, the safety plan until the person is ready, right? So I think we just have to. It's hard for us as providers because we want to help and we want to jump in. That's our natural instinct to sit back a bit, and then walk with them through that process.
I love
And
that. Yeah. And I think that piece, it's like no matter what age you're at, you still have autonomy to make your own
Mhm.
choices. And we need to respect that, even if it doesn't align with necessarily how we would move.
Yeah. Having a sense of agency again on your life is kind of like the first main important step. Uh, since you are maybe in a situation where your agency has been taken away, giving it back and letting the person decide for themselves is important. Speaking of, men also experiencing forms of abuse, there was a question from someone asking, does CCFWE support also any women identifying persons? And second part, where would you refer men to that may be experiencing economic abuse?
For sure, yeah. We support women identifying folks. So our definition of women includes trans women, gender diverse individuals. We currently don't serve men, but that is something we're, hoping to explore in the coming years because we recognize that is a very big gap in services. There is Ontario does have a hotline for male survivors that we tend to refer to for like male and male identifying folks. I can follow up with this person if you want to shoot me a message about this to provide some other specific resources. Because, yes, we do recognize that is a big gap, and men do experience abuse, especially economic abuse, and we do need more supports for that population.
Okay, and Stephanie says yes, please. So she will be following up directly. And then I guess we are kind of coming to the end of it. I know we don't want to go over because people are very busy, but there are, I'm sure, plenty more questions we could tackle. Perhaps we can touch on some of those in our New Year webinar together. Um, Thank you so very much today for making the time and for talking about your work and talking about the Help Us Rise campaign. We hope that this has been useful for everyone present today. If you are interested in continuing to explore this topic this month, given the fact that this is also Financial Literacy Month and Domestic Violence Prevention Month, there's going to be a webinar this Friday organized by Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, which is looking at supporting the economic prosperity of older women, particularly older women from, oh my God, I'm losing my
Community-based.
vocabulary just when I need it.
community-based
From
social
community
services.
in the community-based social services. Thank you. So how can people who work in senior services in the community help support older women of diverse backgrounds, especially from underrepresented groups, build economic prosperity and security? So I find it's a nice pendant. If you're interested in hearing about this, this is on Friday of this week. Ryan, I'll let you conclude our call today.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us and staying with us for the full session. I think it was really enlightening. I learned some new information as well, especially some of the new tools. Both Benedict and I will share that information within the next coming days. Yes, please reach out to us, our organizations, support the Help Rise campaign, and get involved. Anyway, I think sometimes we think that maybe as individuals, we may not be able to take action or do things, but at individual, community, societal level, if we all work together, we can create change and help end the economic abuse that older adults are facing, as well as younger women as well. So thank you all. Thank you for our interpreters. We will, as I say, get this posted as soon as possible because there was so many great links and resources shared here today. And thank you, everybody, and have a good remaining of your week. I guess we're sort of in the middle of the week right now. So thank you all again.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. And please remember, just send your questions to us and we can follow up with any responses. Yeah.
Thank you.